City of North St. Paul workshop meeting for November 16th. Jenny, if you take the roll.
Councilmember Peterson?
Here.
Councilmember Wong?
Here.
Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Mayor Furlong?
Here.
Councilmember Thorson is absent.
Quorum is present. At this time, motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved, Your Honor.
Moved by Councilmember Peterson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Cole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Motion carries. We have a few topics tonight. We also, our city manager is out at this time, so we will turn the meeting over to Ron Ritchie. Oh, okay. We'll turn over to the Finance Director, Dan Winnick. Dan, if we got, I know a few items here, we'll talk about those, and why don't you go ahead and lead the discussion?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the first topic that we're going to be discussing tonight is on the Civic Ready discussion, and I'm going to ask for Carrie to come up and join us. I think this is something very exciting that we need to look at and potentially procure for the city. It's a tool to be able to give complete notification to residents during emergency situations, and that's, I think, how it would be deployed to begin with, but there could be many more applications in the city from the point of potentially even utility notifications and so forth. What you're going to end up hearing about today is that it has the capability currently today in its application to be in multiple languages. I can't even remember how many languages. I think it's 52 languages, and they're
So we do have 70 languages that are spoken at 622. Just a FYI,
wow.
70 different languages.
And they're working on it. It should be deployed, I think, sometime next year, where they can actually have the languages translated for voice messages. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie and let her kind of describe this this tool that the city could use.
Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you see in your packet, we put some materials on this Civic Ready tool, and Dan's kind of given you a really quick overview. I want to kind of backtrack just a little bit and tell you why we're looking at this. Currently, the city has an app that we pay about $3,000 a year for. There's only 68 subscribers on there. The technology is old, they can't update it, it doesn't interact with our Park and Rec software, doesn't interact with OpenGov. So at first I was like, sweet, we can save $3,000. This tool came up, and what our vendor has is, at this time of year, they like to get new tools to cities, and they offer us a pretty substantial discount. So what they're offering us for this tool is basically half price for the first year. So we're paying $3,000 right now for an app that doesn't really do anything for the city, and for $2,500, we can add an app that has multiple uses for the city. There's really not a department of the city that this can't interact with. This app has both a staff-facing app, so that if there's something going on in the field right away that staff needs to log in and deal with. There's also a resident-facing app where if there is emergency notifications or something going on, that those messages will be pushed directly to people's cell phones. It can go to their email, and it will go to their telephone, kind of based on what they sent their subscriber information with. And kind of how this came about was with our new police chief. Phil is really busy reimagining and recreating our community policing policy, and we needed a good way to reach these different neighborhoods. WSB has taken a look at our city maps and done zones based on residency. There's a lot of groundwork in there, but we didn't have a good way to communicate, where this app will fill that gap for us. So like Dan said, we can subscribe residents to this tool. They have their choice of how they want to subscribe to it, how they want their messages, and they can select their default language so that we can get information out to them in their preferences. The other advantage that we have, we can overlay our utility data over the city maps. So in an emergency situation, we can notify people who aren't even subscribed. We can draw a map, we can draw a shape on a portion of the city, and we can notify all those people that are in that zone if there's an emergency. There's some integrations I don't know that we need at this time. There's an Ipaw integration, which is FEMA notifications. I think a lot of those come from the state and county anyway, so I don't think at this point that's something that we need to do. But if we had a missing child, a missing senior, we can upload photos, we can get this information out to our residents, in a matter of seconds. So I don't know how much of that packet information you had a chance to look through, or if you have questions for us. So essentially, this would be replacing an app that's not used and not updatable to the city with an app that'll give us much better functionality for connecting with our residents.
Couple questions I have. One is, will the subscribers that were in the old, will they be able to transfer for the new?
Yes.
So that'll carry over. They won't have to resubscribe to this.
No, and the subscribing on this is really nice. They don't have to make a password or anything. They can just go to the web form that we'll have, and they can opt in for what they want to receive. Another usage of this besides the community policing is as we go into the 2022 street projects. We'll have all those neighborhood groups that will need to be informed, about what's happening in their street in that construction project. And this would be another tool that would really help us. Right now, when there's notifications that go out, it kind of goes out to whoever in the city is subscribing to them, so they're not always very effective, because if there's a water main break, the only people that are really impacted are the people in that zone. So now we can fine tune our messaging and do a better job of communicating the people that need to know when they need to know.
So my second question would be like we do the trash hauling, and we get notices out.
Yes.
Is it able to use that same phone number for this?
We can, when I set up the staff demos, I gave the vendor a scenario from every single department in the city, and that was the one that we did, because we can draw the garbage route maps on this tool. And so say we have a blizzard and we have to delay our garbage service for a day, we can go in right in that zone and notify those affected residents.
Again, are we able to use those same phone numbers?
Yes, and I did some checking with that. The utility people had some questions, they're like, well, what about people, when we're doing notifications and they maybe haven't opted in and we're using our utility data? And there is some legal precedents, I sound like Soren now. If you provide your phone number to the city, that's implied consent. And again, we're not doing this to say, hey, party, this would be for important notifications that our residents would need to get, tending more towards emergencies.
The third question is, so we only had 68 before subscribers. What is the goal?
My goal would be at least 50% of our population. I took a look at the subscribers that we have in our alerts right now, and they're really pathetic. They're under 300. Like any online tool, this isn't like we just blast it once and it's done. This is going to have to become part of our culture. So as new residents come in and set up their utilities, it needs to be that conversation about, here's our alert system in North St. Paul, we need to get you subscribed. I envision having a postcard mailing be sent out to all of our residents and translate that into multiple languages so that we can really take advantage of the meat of this tour. I envision our police, fire, and public works staff having postcards in their vehicles, so when they're out and about interacting with residents, that they're getting this information to people so that we can improve the subscription rates.
Any questions for Carrie?
I think that's great. If it goes up to 5,000, it's still a good bargain. I mean,
Well, it's $2,500 the first year if we
No,
sign by December 15th.
but I mean,
Yeah.
no, I know it's gonna
Yeah.
go up to that price, but if it does what it's supposed to do, and we're gonna capture more of the folks, I think that's a
Well, and a big advantage that I see as somebody who's managing the communication channels for the city, like some of the website stuff, only I can do those things. I have the login access where I can set up our department heads so that Phil has access to his alerts. Rod's got access for his, and we can pre-write those. kind of the standards, water main, power down. And so that'll be easy for them to initiate those alerts on the fly, basically from an app, from their phone.
Councilmember Wine?
Yeah, is there some sort of, different tiers or different things that will trigger certain types of announcements and calls? Just because, sometimes you may not want communication to go out just quite yet, or if there are just certain things that may need a little bit more thinking over before that. So is there a protocol and a procedure?
That's stuff that we will initiate as staff on our onboarding. I do know that for emergency messages, FEMA-type messages, there's an authorization code that has to get issued so that you don't have, the example that our vendor uses is that missile alert that came out of Honolulu a couple years ago where a disgruntled employee, fired an emergency alert, and there's safety protocols in place for there. I envision working with staff and kind of, setting up making it as easy as possible for them in an emergency situation. Because, if you would have asked me about this tool when I first came, I would have said, we don't need it. But, in the short time that I've been here, we've closed City Hall due to a pandemic. We've shut down the downtown. We've placed a curfew on the city. There's more and more, there's been more frequent instances where this really would be a benefit to our residents.
Nothing else? Thought I had a question, and so who will do the alerts? Would it be the city manager would have control over that?
We can set it up based on the type of alert and give different access. So in the training phase, it'll probably be really short until we're comfortable with the tool, But I envision, Phil will have an alert that he'll be able to get us police alerts. We'll give electric, we'll have access when they have an electric alert. I'll work with Dan on utility stuff and then work with Ron on public works. Our vision, and it won't happen right away. As we onboard this tool and get used to it, our vision would be to kind of replace some of the antiquated notifications we have in our utilities to go to a tool that's a little bit more responsive and can help us deal with the different language barriers and people's notification preferences.
Does it work with landline?
Yes. So how you set it up, when the screen comes up, you're writing an email, you're writing a text message, and you're typing out what the voicemail message will be. And so based on what people's preferences are, that's the way they will get their message.
Good. Anything?
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome.
Are other cities using this?
Yes. This is actually their upgraded tool, so they're in the middle of converting some other cities. Blaine uses it, Big Lake uses it, Jackson County uses it, and I'm very closely following. There is a county in California that bought the tool specifically for utility notifications, so I'm going to be following them as they implement, because I think we can learn a lot for that.
Good. Very good. Anything else for?
In terms of cost, I see, we have year one, year two, we've got a substantial,
It doubles from year one to year two. Yeah.
it doubles. And then is there any projections of increase in cost in year three or
No,
beyond that?
and from what I've seen in the time I've been here, our web platform pricing has remained very stable. I haven't seen an increase.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing else? Thank you, Gary, appreciate it. Go back to /city, no, back to Dan.
The next item on the agenda for the workshop today is the Finance Department overview, and I'll turn that over to the Finance Director. Yeah, so I would like to kind of inform the council today regarding the Finance Department and where we're at with a couple of I guess, I'm not going to call them issues. I look at them as more of opportunities and decisions that I think the city council needs to be aware of and help me making decisions as we're moving forward. The first part that I want to talk about is staffing. If you're not aware, Kyle, our finance department's accountant, has accepted a position in a different city and will be leaving at the end of this month. That leaves quite a bit of a hole in the finance department. When I walked into this position, I noticed a number of things that I think we can make improvements on in the long run. And in an ideal situation, we would have a permanent city manager on board. We would hire a consultant to help kind of review the finance department for its structure, ways of efficiencies, looking at it from the standpoint of what other functions could be provided, some things that, and suggestions of maybe looking at, I'll just give kind of an example of maybe taking the HR function within the finance department itself, maybe doing a better job on purchasing instead of having that as a decentralized approach that is delegated at this point in time to department heads. So those are just some of the viewpoints. Unfortunately, time is not necessarily always on our side. I want to thank the interim city manager for working with me last week and trying to come up with an offer to retain our accountant, but he declined that and went is going to a different city. So I'm faced with, how do I develop an interim plan? Some of what I'm going to say may be okay, some may not, and so I'm really looking for your feedback at this point in time. To me, what I want to see is, I want to see the finance department mature and do a better job over time in a number of different areas. The HR and the purchasing is just a part of that. I think we have a very dedicated and professional team. Those team members that are there are Jackie, Barb, Taylor, and Angie. I have been totally impressed on their dedication and professionalism. I believe that that'll continue. I cannot afford to lose any other individuals at this point in time. So what I am asking for your direction and your thoughts are, here's kind of my preliminary kind of plan in a very nutshell, looking for questions and answers to come from the city council, is one, I would like to move forward with starting to get proposals from a consultant to help out. Some of the key pieces that I need them to look at is job titles, appropriate structure, succession planning, making sure that we're building up the correct redundancies. Some of the job classes that are today do not allow for building in such a small group to be able to have what I always call primary and secondary responsibilities, making sure that people have backups. I just want to share a quick little story about that and how perspective and how we look at things a little bit differently. And I'm actually going to use the individual's name because I think it shows my first glance at it, and then I'll share my second glance at it. My first glance at it, and the individual's name is Jackie, and she is a very professional and dedicated individual in the finance department. Early on, when I was here, this individual had her oldest daughter's open house for high school. What an amazing event as a parent to actually see your child going to graduate from high school. She was having that on a Saturday. We all know what type of planning goes into some type of event like that. And lo and behold, here she comes in on Friday morning to balance the cash drawers. It was her day off. She came in to do this because there really isn't a well-established and well-trained backup for her function. Didn't know that. I thought, to me, I looked at it and said, wow, what professional, what dedicated employee. Then all of a sudden, my other perspective was, wow, we're not building the redundancies that we need to be able to establish and to maintain our finance department to that premier level of excellence on a continuous basis, and not able to absorb the loss of personnel. And so that's part of where that consultant's gonna come in and help us. How do we do things? I've heard different things that we lose to a certain city, or we lose, that we're not getting the top of the echelon. I'll disagree with that. But that's something a consultant can help us determine. Size of a city doesn't necessarily determine what the compensation of an individual is. It determines the number and quantity of staff that you need. We still need to be able to be competitive to other governmental agencies. We need to be competitive against the private sector. That's my long-term goal, what I want to see. I want to see us restructure how we do budgeting. I want it to be more participatory. In other words, I want to have citizens involved in a more formal manner in us developing our budget, before it's actually presented to the city council. These are things that I want to see move forward. This has kind of hurt a little bit of losing a key staff person. To make it through this, I'm going to call it this interim period, to allow us to do it right by hiring a consultant, to get a city manager on board that I can actually have these dialogues with and get some direction and be able to answer their questions too, and to get their insights into it, which is critical for our organization. I'm going to need to buy some time. And so how I plan on buying some time is that two different pieces. One, I'm going to look at reallocating some of the workload, again, maintaining our internal controls, our segregation of duties with current staff. What that may end up resulting in is that some staff may end up being currently, because they're union employees, working out of class. If that's the case, we'll end up having to bump up their salary during this interim time period. Again, it's an interim time period until the consultant has completed their full and presented the city with its full report and recommendations. In addition, I need to have somebody that I believe has experience, knowledge of all the governmental accounting, and that's somebody that I can trust. This is the tricky part, and this is where I really need your input onto it. I have such a person. The person has 4 years of state auditor experience and over 29 years of government experience outside of the state auditor. The rub with this person here is this person happens to be my wife. The person is currently retired, could come in on a 1 day a week basis. It would be a limited duration, limited number of hours. It would be no more than 450 hours. It would bridge that gap for us to get through this consultant, getting the city manager on board. Those are my two kind of asks for us to build a stronger team in the long run. And I want us to do it the right way by having a consultant and the city manager on board instead of trying to do some, I'm going to call it, quote unquote, a knee-jerk reaction, and it doesn't benefit us in the long run. So I'm opening that up for kind of discussion. That's my first kind of topic on the finance department. So I'm opening that up for questions, discussions, and so forth.
And Dan and I have had some conversations, not real in depth, but these times right now are a little difficult in regards to not having a city manager, a full-time city manager in place, and also with Kyle leaving. It creates a big hole right now. His proposal, if it's anybody else, I would say yes. When you said his wife, it's kind of, I don't know how you two work together, or, but I think we do need something in an interim, and this would be interim and temporary. So I will open it up to council, your thoughts. And again, I think this time, the timing is not the perfect, and I think we all understand that. You know, Brian is the interim city manager, and to me, it's kind of a lame duck. You know, he just wants to make sure things are status quo, get through this time before we get a new full-time city manager. So it does put us in a precarious situation. But I think with the timing of Kyle leaving, you know, we'd have some important issues that we need to take care of between now and the end of the year. So those are just some thoughts coming through my head. Councilmember Peterson?
I got a chance to talk to Dan, and I appreciate your honesty and, you know. I guess I don't have, there's no conflict of interest. I mean, I know you have to kind of, you know, dole out the responsibilities of the jobs and all that. And like the mayor says, I mean, we've been in a pickle for a while, and then we haven't had any continuity. And that finance department has to run. It has to run smartly and effectively. And if that's what you think is best, and you would know, you know, I'm fine with it. I mean, we got to get back on track, and that succession is so important. And your staff is wonderful, but like if you lose anybody else, or somebody's off work, or, you know, or sick or something, yeah, it's tough. You know, and they work all very well together. I've been in there, and they're very, very cordial. They work as a team, and you're a good leader. So we're lucky to have that situation. So I'm okay with it. I don't see a conflict, so, per se. It might on the outside look like it, but.
And I do want to address that, and yes, it's not an ideal situation. But there's ways the individual, and see, I'm even saying individual, even though the person's my wife, the individual will not have control over cash accounts or any banking information. I would be the ultimate approver on anything that the individual does. There'll still be checks and balances that'll be established. I would not be recommending this in any way, shape, or form. If this was a long-term solution, this isn't. It's to bridge a gap right now, and to be able to buy some time to do things the right way. And the right way to me is to be able to have a permanent city manager and to have a consultant on board to make sure we put a framework together that is sustainable into the future. And to answer the question, you won't even know the two of us are even married. Both of us have worked in Ramsey County, and many years people didn't even know we were husband and wife until they heard our last names. That's, I think both of us carry a very professional, ethical belief in integrity when it comes to work. The reason why I'm suggesting this is because of the short notice, the time frame of where we're at as far as being respectful for a city manager, and having the interim city manager in place right now, that I'm trying to do things the right way and not being in a reactive mode, but to continue the planning that I would like to see us in, the direction that I would like to see the finance department go into the future.
Yeah, and she's well experienced, so you're not gonna lose anything. She can hit the road, you know, hit the ground running. I think that's important. Not that you don't have time to, you know, teach anybody, but I think right now we're like behind, you know, a rock and a hard place, you know. And I want to take that pressure off your department, and we get a city manager here that's here, you know, and you're gonna be working with that person daily. So, I think it's a good move, I think.
And we have in the past used a service, temporary service, Because I think we did lose our finance director or even support a few years ago. Morgan, do you remember, is it your firm that does that, or there's a firm out there that does?
I want to say they used either Abdo Myers or maybe another financial consulting firm to assist them to bridge that gap.
Right, right. Yep. Councilmember Wong?
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I think it's, really, notable that you can say, I need help with X, Y, and Z, so I appreciate that. I do hear that this is a very difficult situation to be in. Losing Kyle is a big deal. I have a little bit of concern for the temporary interim position going to your wife. And I think part of that is, whether that, falls within our nepotism policies, I don't even know at this point. I would like to, ask about that. I think that's something we need to ask about and be very careful about. I think that's criticism that the community has of us historically, so I just, it's something to be very mindful of. So I guess, what are the alternatives? Is it, so that's one option, is this accountant with many, many years of experience. Are there accounting firms that work specifically in public finance that could be of assistance? What are some of the other options that we may have?
Councilmember Cole?
I guess to start out, Dan, you're a rock star. You're doing a fantastic job. I think I teased you from day one that you've got here, and I asked you one question the day you started, and tonight I know the answer to that question. No, you're not. Phenomenal what you've done so far. I love the structure and process, how you laid everything out, the direction, the mindfulness of what you want to do, the recognition of the team and staff that you currently have. They're fantastic. I like the fact that you want to pause, take a look at how do we build for the future, not the gut reaction of let's just get a warm body in here and then figure out how to make it work. So I appreciate the steps and the time that you took to outline that. As far as bringing your wife on board, I'm not necessarily as concerned with the checks and balances of how the position is structured. I'm concerned with the potential perception. And that's Dan, that's more my feeling than it is anything else that's out there. And I don't, that's the piece of it I struggle in, and I've had 4 minutes to think about it, so.
No, and I respect that. And I know the perception is tough to overcome. I'm not gonna disagree with that. And again, I'll be the first to stated in an ideal situation, that's not what you would do.
Yep.
For me personally, in the finance director's position, I've been here for 4 months. I'm still learning certain things too as we're moving forward. I need to have somebody. I'm losing somebody that I have built a trust level with in Kyle. I need to have somebody that I can have that same trust, that I don't have to take a long period of time to develop. This person will not be here for a long period of time. This is trying to bridge that gap. We have we have year end coming up. We've got an audit that we're going to be going through, and that'll be starting up in not too long of the near future. Those are some critical paths that we're encountering. I'll also talk about, there's another item that I'm going to talk about, and that's talking about our software and where we're at with that today. So we have some critical components that are coming. For me, I need to be able to have that comfort, the comfort that I've had with Kyle, I need to have that comfort with somebody else. The perception, I agree, I don't know how to overcome, and if your direction is that the perception is too big to overcome, I respect that. I'm not gonna fight that, because I also realize that that's not an ideal situation. But again, the key part to it that I look at is it's an interim, a very short-term duration, or it's a short-term, limited number of hours that this individual would be here. They would not be here on every day of the week. They would not be, be here. They would be more of, in certain ways, that support role into keeping things moving smoothly forward so we don't lose a lot of ground. And it allows us, it's kind of the interim piece to it. It's allowing us the opportunity to bring in that consultant with the city manager and to be able to build a structure that's going to be sustainable in the future. I see some huge benefits. I also see the perception that's there. And so that's where I'm laying it out to the city council, and I take the city council's direction.
Councilmember Peterson.
Isn't she coming, on board for her skill level? She's not getting as much as she could somewhere else, or, not that she's not on the cheap, but it was more reasonable, or is that what you're trying to?
Yeah, what I was looking at, obviously, it would be in the accountant's job scale. With her years of experience, obviously, she would be at the top of the scale. That's not what my suggestion is. My suggestion is either step 1 or step 2 at the most. That's less than what you're paying your current accountant. And she has probably, 3 times the amount of experience that individual has. And that's not anything against that current individual. I'm just saying that when you look at the overall experience the individual has.
So I think what I'm hearing is that you do have support from the council in regards to some sort of interim person.
Yeah.
Whether or not that person is your wife, or whether it's outside service that comes in to give us a hand. But I would say that you'd have to work closely with Brian, the city manager, and determine, because he's the one that's supposed to be doing the hiring and the firing and all that right now. We're just here to kind of give our blessing one way or the other, whether or not we're all in support of the perception. I don't know if that's the concern here, but I think working with Brian and maybe even the city attorney, those two together to work through this interim, short-term phase. Any thoughts on that, council?
No, I agree with that, Mayor. What you just said, I'm on board with that, with Brian being the hiring.
Because Brian does work with union, Brian works with,
And he's still
with
on
the city
board until
manager.
whenever, so.
And whether or not it makes sense to him, it's got to make sense to him,
Right.
too, to
No,
make it work.
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Cole.
Sorry. Fully support Brian making the decision, and the perception isn't mine, it's the perceived perception of the residents, and that's where my head was when I was making the comments. You've earned my trust, that's there. So it's just, it's not necessarily my seat, it's that of the residents.
Councilmember.
I would
Wong?
echo that. Yeah, I fully support, some sort of staffing for you in the interim, and to follow suit with your long-term plans. I think they're really great, visions. And, again, we've gone through a lot in my time and in my term, and it's because of trust issues. And so just to be mindful of the context in which we are moving from.
And I think having that consultant too will benefit the department to go through again and figure out what's the best layout for that department, along with your ideas and the new city manager coming in, because the new city manager is the one that's going to be working probably with this consultant, because I don't think we're going to have a new full-time person in there until after the city manager is here. Okay?
I thank you very much for the discussion on that item. And again, I want to conclude the part of the staffing that I am very fortunate to have a very professional and dedicated staff. And again, I want to repeat their names: Jackie, Barb, Taylor, and Angie. And they're willing to work together. And that, to me, it just solidifies our team that much more, even through adversity.
I think that's part of the band that you put together, that
Yeah.
Councilmember Cole said, you're a rock star, so.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. The other item that I want to talk about with the financing department is the software program. So the city council had approved back on, I believe it was June 30th of 2020, based upon the COVID situation at that point in time, that there really was a necessity and a move, and I absolutely agree with this, to move our financial software system into the cloud. There was a contract that has been executed with OpenGov. That contract has 4 different components to it. One is a reporting and transparency platform. One is a budgeting and planning suite. One is a permitting, licensing, and code enforcement suite. Those 3 components have been up and running and have been successful. We're now currently working on the financial suite component to it. And I was hoping to have an opportunity to talk in person with our attorney before this meeting. That didn't happen, so I'm just going to be talking about the facts of the situation of where we're at right now with the OpenGov. The initial plan to have the OpenGov financial system was to be in place by the end of this year. That will not happen. It is right now at a minimum pushed out to the end of March. We, at one point in time, if everyone remembers, in August, we cut over our general ledger and accounts payable to the OpenGov. It took us 1 month to issue a check. Unacceptable. Then all of a sudden we started hearing the deadlines were being pushed out. Utility billing, which is another very critical component to the finance department and is very transparent and seeing from the residential standpoint, because that's where their billings are coming from, which could create a huge heartache. To me, if our accounts payable, what happened in our accounts payable were to happen in our utility billing, each and every one of you would have had your phone ringing off the hook. Cannot let that happen. Shortly thereafter, the time frame pushed out to March. We were actually supposed to be in testing in October and go live in November on the utility billing. In addition to that, I don't know all the particulars of why they made the decision to do this, but the payroll and the time reporting was not going to be fully integrated as part of their OpenGov system, and they had introduced, would we be willing to look at a third-party vendor? We did. And this was back in August. We looked at the third-party vendor. We vetted the vendor out. We even looked at the potential of adding an HR module onto it so we could start to do more things online. I have been waiting 3 months for an amendment for that decision to move with that third-party payroll. These are warnings to me. These are concerns. I last week had reached out to them and asked them, could they please give me a status on what the city has already prepaid as far as professional fees, which the professional fees are used for the implementation. I received this yesterday afternoon. We prepaid for 750 hours. That's included in the scope of work, which is attached to the agreement itself. That was approved by the City Council on June 30th of 2020. It had on there that they're over 370 hours over our prepay right now, which equates to approximately $74,000. They're also saying that it's going to take an additional 350 hours to complete, an additional $70,000. You could have heard a pin drop as my jaw hit the floor when I opened up the email and saw where that was at. I had a meeting with a couple of OpenGov representatives today. The bottom line is that, and I've also had our attorney review the contract with OpenGov to find out what my recourses are, what can I do. There is a clause that's in the contract that gives us a one-time out of the financials. It expires on December 31st of this year. You need to give 10 business days of written notice ahead of time, which basically puts us that we need to make that final decision whether it's a go or no-go and continue moving with OpenGov somewhere about December 14th. Right now, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with the decision whether we move forward or not. What I have accomplished, and again, I wanted to have this reviewed by our attorney to find out, what liability is potentially out there for the city regarding those overage of hours. I received this just now at 4:39 prior to coming to this meeting, and I had asked the question, and in my discussion today with OpenGov, is that to give the council the full ability to make a clear decision one way or the other. And I didn't tell them all my long list. They know about the amendment. They know about some of the other components to it. But we'll have a little bit more of a discussion on that. That I had talked to them about that I needed to know what the liability exposure, what their intentions were, and I needed something in writing, whether the city decided to go forward or to not go forward. Because what I keep hearing from them is that they want to be a successful partner. They want to be a successful partner from the fact that they're not in the Minnesota market as far as their financial software is concerned. They're developing this as we're moving through with us. We're a partner of theirs. And that's part of the issues that have come up from where we're at today. To me, I left the meeting with them today with the feeling that, yeah, if we move forward, they were likely to be able to say, hey, we'll eat those costs. If we decide that we're not going to move forward, then they're gonna say, well, then you owe those costs, at least for the hours that were already over. I basically had said to them, I cannot put my city council into that type of position, and I need to know what your final decision is. What I received in a response today at 4:39 was basically OpenGov is committed to covering the FIN project hours, including 370 overage and 350 remaining hours to the original project scope of scope of work scope, as well as the payroll portion of the UKG. That UKG was the third party for the payroll subscription. I don't know if that's legally binding or not. That's something I need to work with the attorney with. In light of some of the red flags in my time being here, I'm not comfortable in making a recommendation for the city council to continue to move forward with the OpenGov. We've already spent money, good money, taxpayers' money in moving forth with this. There's too many concerns whether we'll actually make that finish line with OpenGov and what's the timing of that. I strategically made a decision that I believe was for the betterment of the city back in, I believe it was about the middle, or maybe it was about October time, when the time frame for when we were notified that the time frame for utility building was being pushed out to sometime next year. we were in a circumstance where we had GL, accounts payable, being done on one system and everything else being done on another system. And this was being uploaded into this other system periodically, which required balancing and everything else. Virtually, a financial tool should be a tool. It should help managers make decisions. None of our department heads could know where their budgets were at, because it would take every once a month to wait for that upload to come in, be balanced out, and to know where they were at. The plan was to live with that type of a scenario till the end of the year, not till the end of March or potentially even longer. That's unacceptable. So I've made the decision, and it created some additional work for our staff here in the city. We backed all that information off and got it back into the Encode system. So we have one financial record for the city. And basically the approach was, let's change the approach of how we're doing this, this implementation, and that is we need to test and make sure each one of the modules is tested, approved by us, and then when all modules are approved by us, have been tested and approved, then we will go live with everything. With the deadline keep pushing out, not being able to get amendments in a timely manner, with the fact that we've got a deadline looming of a one-time out on this contract, with the potential additional liabilities that could be coming our way even if we move forward, I can't make a recommendation that we continue to move this path. The one part that is very interesting and part of the decision that was made back in June 30th of 2020 was the fact that it was moving us to the cloud. There's other options that are out there that are much less painful for the city. We could go onto a system, truthfully, the system that we're currently on, and move it to the cloud and have no migration, virtually no additional training would be needed. And in light of what has now happened with our staffing, we're gonna have limited resources to help us do that implementation and continue with OpenGov. But I also need to get our attorney to weigh in on our legal responsibilities and our legal liabilities, you know, as it exists with the current contract. So as of right now, my recommendation would be not to continue to move with OpenGov. We're gonna end up having to make a decision within the upcoming weeks, and whether it's a go or a no-go, and then what type of platform that we wanna be looking for into the future. With that, I'll take any questions, comments, thoughts.
So, I mean, we got Carrie here that works with OpenGov. Can I, if you don't mind, I'm gonna bring her up here just because I'm assuming if you're frustrated, she's probably frustrated too with the situation, because this is new to us and this is a different module, you know, than all the rest of them. And I think everything else is working to where we're supposed to be with those modules, besides the finance, keeping the finance separate. I don't know if you can.
As far as what we're doing in permits and licensing, we love it. It works perfectly. We interact with our building inspectors are in that tool, WSB is in that tool. We can turn licenses and permits faster and more accurately than when I first came. So I know that's a bit confusing because there are different modules, but the part of OpenGov that is running on our side of the aisle is performing quite well for the city.
Have you worked with the finance part?
A little bit. I sat in on their trainings on the initial purchasing. You know, it all looks good in demos, but, you know, I certainly have to defer to Dan and what he thinks. He's the one who's actually working with the numbers. And I think the biggest thing that got my attention was anytime you're doing imports and exports, you're just opening yourselves up, you know, for a problem or a misload or an issue. But, you know, like Dan says, we can't risk any issues that would happen with our utility billing. We just can't.
Okay. Questions for Carrie or Dan?
kind of surprised because I thought this open gov was, better than sliced bread.
Well, it is on what we
I
do.
was gonna say, I think there's a lot of different modules.
Different modules, yeah, I know, yeah.
Well, the finance module is the one that,
This one was kind of a surprise to me that it wasn't clicking as,
Well, it's kind of a surprise to me too, but I haven't been involved with the financial implementation. I just know what the implementation happened when we built up the citizen services portion of it. But, we reached snags too when we were building up, permits and licensing. We sat for probably 4 to 6 weeks waiting, little tiny North St. Paul found some big bugs in that system and they fixed them for us. We moved on, but on the finance side, that doesn't seem to be happening at that same rate.
What is the representatives or company's response in terms of the reason for their delay? Why are they delaying?
Delaying what part to it? The system itself?
Mm-hmm, and just.
There's,
contacting and
you
getting
know,
back and-
So to my knowledge, we are their only client on the financial software in the state of Minnesota. So that's another concern, that's out there as far as, when you're looking at hiring new staff in learning systems, that we have no other counterpart that we can reach to, somebody who has the familiarity with an OpenGov system. They're heavily based in Texas and California. This is part of my own opinion and some of the comments that representatives from OpenGov have said. And that's why they want this to be a successful project, and why the city actually got a very good deal on this software, is because they're trying to get into this market. And basically it's using us as that example, to move forward, which I have no issue with as far as that is concerned. My issues are, and you just heard Carrie say, it took 4 to 6 weeks to get some bugs. If we're live and it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get the bugs fixed out of it, what do I do with the utility? We already had that issue happen with the accounts payable side to it, where we couldn't get a check issued. Fortunately, many vendors calling, which they did, happens internally to the finance department, not to the city council. So you're not gonna hear about that. I'll guarantee you, if it happens on the utility billing, we'll all hear about it. And that's part of where, my gut is telling me there's been too many unanswered questions, the pushing off, the deadlines, and that's part of, again, why that decision that I made in October of moving us back to Encode, of having, one financial system as our record, was to protect us to what would be potentially happening into the future, and if there's additional delays and so forth. Now I'm gonna complicate that all that much more and say, hey, now I just lost a key member of the staff, and we are already gonna be faced with a number of other challenges in the finance department, and then in addition, keep going down this path, which could create more costs to the city, or you just say, hey, at this point in time, it may be the right decision. And again, I'm looking for direction. There may be the decision to move to a different platform. And again, our current system that we have is something that everybody is familiar with, staff is very comfortable with. It's made enhancements. It's now moved to that, to the cloud. They're making regular enhancements to it, so it allows that flexibility to work from anywhere. We're not going to be we're not paying for something to be developed as we are today, and being kind of that testing ground. And I wish I could say, yeah, everything was going perfectly fine, and that we're moving forward. We have been moving forward with them. It's just that there's so many different signs that things are being pushed off, and ultimately, when we reach that time in March, If it's not successful, and if we can get to that part with our staffing level, and we get to that part, and it's not functional, it's not working, what do we do?
Councilmember Cole?
So I guess for clarity, your recommendation not to move forward with OpenGov is an all or nothing recommendation, as opposed to just the financial component, node, mode, whatever we're,
It's just the financial
just the
component to
financial.
it.
So
Yeah, so.
so the rest of
no,
it would
the rest-
remain in,
yes.
okay, that was where I was
Yeah.
having some confusion. I wanted.
No, the other three modules have been approved, are working fine. You know, we've been doing the majority of the budget on the budgeting software. There's some very cool capabilities that it has, whether it's on the workforce plan, whether it's putting the information to be able to easily make it presentable for the public. I'm not in disagreement on any of those pieces.
Can
And
you,
the one time out is just for the financials, not for the other three components.
so can you work, is the current system I'm hearing is still usable? You can continue to function in it? We don't need, I mean, is that something you can live in for 4, 6, 8 months?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
He's even mentioning just
Staying
staying,
in it,
staying
period.
within code, period.
Right. It would be eventually my recommendation for us at approximately the same cost that we're currently paying for the software maintenance of the Encode today to move it to the cloud. You know, that would require, again, they would move, and here's another key component to it. They would move all of our data up to the cloud. They would give us the ability to test it, to make sure that everything's fine, which I think should be much easier, since it's already in the Encode product itself. And then they will have us up and running in 90 days from the time that we make that decision to move forward. There's more users of the Encode product in the state of Minnesota than there definitely is of the OpenGov. So we situate ourselves a little bit better as far as attracting talent coming into the city in the finance arena. There would be no implementation cost addition if you were to move the current Encode into the cloud. It's just going to be the software maintenance, which we're currently paying for. One of the biggest probably positives to it is that it brings all of our history with it. And that's something that even if we move forward with the OpenGov system, we don't have all of our history out there. We have 3 years of our history. So we still need to maintain the server today that Encode resides on.
And that's a point, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's really important for us to consider is the expense of those servers when they need to be upgraded and maintained, and that brings us much stability and cost savings when we can move stuff to the cloud. You know, the security factors and that stuff is really important, but maintenance and replacing a server and setting it all up is very expensive.
I got Morgan shaking his head back there like he knows what this is all about.
And I've got,
Gone through the same thing on our organization, moving everything into the cloud, and it does save a lot of money and save a lot of expense and maintenance and add some redundancy and security, I guess, is what we've seen.
yeah, I'm in the process of, it's a little bit of a learning curve, but everything is moving to the cloud as well. One last question. Is there a benefit by having everything under one umbrella, under one roof?
As far as the financial components will be underneath one roof.
No, but I mean, as far as having all 4 of the components.
No, because they're not truly underneath one roof today.
They don't interact, they don't, there's not a, They're not something that brings everything together under one, so it's, okay.
No, and what I can say from the staff, when we started working with OpenGov, Encode was built to be a financial system. It wasn't built to be a permitting and licensing and park rental system, and that's where a lot of the frustration and errors and problems came on the community development side, because they were trying to use a tool that wasn't built for their functions.
So, go
I
ahead.
was only going to weigh in on an opinion after all my questions, but please feel free to jump in.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I guess, based on the information learned tonight, based on what you've shared and the way that it was laid out, I'm fine not moving forward with the financial piece of OpenGov, especially with what you've got going on right now as well. It's just not another piece that needs to be added, I think, on top of your plate to get everything done. If they want to, revisit down the road, again, that was why I asked if there was something that tied everything together, and it doesn't sound like there is. So I fully support your direction on where you want to take it.
InGov, does it offer anything else besides the financial part?
The OpenGov?
Oh,
Oh,
Encode, sorry.
Yes, it.
Blending.
I'm blending, I just,
It,
too many clouds and govs and all that.
it does offer, just like Carrie was saying, the licensing and permitting, but they found that the OpenGov is a better system for that, which,
Are those separate modules in that,
in the Encode,
in the Encode? Are those,
they're modules, but it's all fully integrated.
so we're not
in
paying,
Encode.
we're not paying for those, it's all part of one package?
So underneath the Encode, you pay separately for the modules that you want to utilize. We can't totally break off of the licensing and permitting because the history was not pulled over all the way for into OpenGov when they did the implementation of that. So that's been an issue. That's an issue whether you move forward with OpenGov or not. It's the history has not all been moved over. And so I've had a number of conversations with Carrie and Carrie's staff. Cynthia has weighed in greatly that we still need to have that data available for them because there's not all of the permits have been closed. So we need to do that. Eventually, those modules we could drop off and we wouldn't be paying for anymore. And that's
On the Encode?
on the Encode. And we were trying to look at doing that, but, I'd rather play it and be safe and make sure that we have that history. And more so if we do move forward and move it to the cloud, which there's a great amount of benefits, we'll have that history for them to actually go back and look, and we'll actually not have the additional costs of a server and so forth.
Okay. Anybody else?
Aside from saving money on the server, is there any savings or additional costs as if we move to Encode?
Compared to OpenGov, compared to Encode, Encode is a higher price tag to it. So you're looking at, and again, it is a very good deal that the city has with the OpenGov. But again, there's a part of a reason for that, and that is because they're trying to develop that in the state of Minnesota. But you're paying approximately right now about $15,000. You're going to have to pay a little bit more for the payroll time reporting, and you're going to have approximately about $7,000 on an annual basis for the Encode or for the server component to it, which Metro INET is charging us for their maintenance components to that. In addition, the current server will have to be replaced, I do believe, by the end of 2023. And I can't tell you whether that's going to be an additional cost. I would assume it will be additional cost for the city to do that replacement of that unless we move that information to the cloud.
And that sounds like something inevitable. You would do.
Inevitably, we're going to end up having to do that. So, rough order of magnitude, total cost on the OpenGov when you're looking at things somewhere about the $25,000 range. In code will probably cost you about 43 a year. So there's about a delta of about $18,000 a year.
Okay. So Carrie, it looks like you don't have to be city attorney now. The city attorney did show up and, I'm just kidding, sorry. So it sounds like we have some time. We've got till the end of the year to make that,
We actually have till about December 14th to make that decision because we need to give 10 business days of notification if we're going to back out prior to December 31st. So that's kind of our.
so we have a,
deadline.
we do have a meeting before
Yes,
the
we do.
December
Yes,
14th.
absolutely.
And you do have some details to work out with the city attorney,
Absolutely.
it sounds like. So
Absolutely.
I think at the first meeting is December, bring it back to the
Yeah, with.
council
with the
with
decision.
the, what's gonna have to happen with the over prepaid stuff and all that.
Yes.
That we'll have to determine.
Yeah.
Make sense? Okay. All right, we got about 20 minutes to go over a 2022 budget detail. Thank you, Carrie.
When I looked at this agenda earlier last week, I didn't realize that I would actually be able to talk this long and get this part. And I see we have another item after this, so I have to be respectful for that. But, so basically, I know we moved to the OpenGov budgeting platform, which really made things being very transparent, very interactive for both the council and for the residents to be able to go and do that. But one of the pieces that's been missing is that it's, you have to drill down, in those stories to actually get down to line items and that. And so I came up with a way to be able to export that information from the OpenGov and to put it into spreadsheets, and all the spreadsheets are formulated the same way because of the download that needed to be able that I developed to be able to pull this information in. I'm not going to go through all the line items that are here. On December 7th, we will be holding the Truth and Taxation hearing. On December 21st, we'll be doing the final approval of the 2020 budget. Right now, all of the budgets have been approved with the exception of the electric fund, which interim city manager and the director of the electric department, we're still working on that. There's some changes that may need to take place there and some additional information on some of the rate increases that he has received recently. So we'll be kind of looking at there. I put together kind of the summary so everybody kind of knows of where we were at through this whole entire process, going back to May 18th to where we're at today. Some of the bigger highlights that we're kind of looking at, again, our levies at 5.99%. When we look at our general fund, both our revenue and expenditures have increased 5.86%. Our personnel and benefits component of our general fund have increased 10.35%. That's including cost of living, that's including benefit, increases in benefits, that's including step increases and so forth, and it's also including that we've actually increased our complement approximately 3 full-time positions. If you remember, we've added a full-time public works director, we've added a police sergeant, we've added a part-time CSO, and we've added the increase on the community development department from a part-time to a full-time. So that's all incorporated within that increase. If you look at all of the other line items that are in the general fund, it's only a 0.19% increase, very minimal. Our revenues are pretty much, very conservatively, very stable, very, very flat. If we look at the other group of funds that predominantly are comprised and take, between the general fund and these are pretty much, from our budgeted standpoint, are pretty much probably about, 80% of our total budget and expenditures, if not more, and that's looking at the enterprise. And in the enterprise, we're seeing that right now that the revenues are only increasing a short, a 0.3% increase. Expenditures are increasing 6.4%. 13.54%. Again, the driving factor for those expenditure increases are the personnel benefits that are amounting to 13.45%. In addition to the driving factor on costs on the enterprise fund is that when we went through with the CIP plan, that we've now put the capital items into the enterprise funds where they should be, and that's an increase from that standpoint. So when I'm going to walk you through just kind of one of the budgets, line item detail, because they're all configured the same way, just to kind of get you a sense or feel. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you have specific questions, we definitely can look at those tonight. If you have any questions on any of the line items, please send me an email, and we'll address those on either December 7th or the 21st, so that on the 21st, you're making your final, very well-informed decision and in the best interests of the residents of the city of North St. Paul. So each one, you'll see that there's going to be a personnel summary, a complement control to kind of show you this. For the general fund, will give you a summary of everything that's in the general fund, broken down by department. And then you'll also see the summary on the revenues and expenditures for the whole entire general fund. And then you'll see line items. And they're all configured, all revenues, unfortunately, and expenditures all have 2 pages. That'll show you all of the line items that we use, and it'll show you the history from 2017 actual all the way up to the 2022 proposed budget. And again, if there's any questions on specific line items, we can look at them tonight, or if you want to send me an email, I can address them on December 7th.
Any questions for the finance director? And you also have the ability to email him and meet with him personally too, because I know we're running short of time here, but thank you, Dan, for that presentation. Any questions for the finance director?
Yeah, I will have a clarification question in regards to the planning commission and the funding around that, but I can certainly email you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know we got one question that we need to handle, and I just talked to you a little while ago in regards to it, and that's with the car show. We need a bill for them.
Yeah, we're
He's right behind you, and I know they need a bill, and and I'll be honest, I think Bob, with what's gone on in the last few months, I think Dan might even need some help in regards to walking through the bill for the history cruisers. Or do you have that?
we discussed that actually today, to make sure that we have that. So we'll, definitely, if you don't mind, I'll speak with you just for a point of clarification. But I think we have the information. We just want to make sure that we're being consistent of what we've charged
Right.
from year to year.
Right, right. Good. I appreciate that. Okay, we got a few minutes in regards to your last topic, and that is the 7th Avenue improvements.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So in a recent review meeting between engineering public works staff, which was last week, we were covering some of the early preliminary edge of road lines, I guess, if you will, from a design standpoint, confirming things with Public Works. And the question of what to do between Helen and First Street with regards to on-street parking came up. We thought it was important to bounce this off the council and get your feedback. If you've looked at your packet, basically there's a couple of layouts that will, in schematic format, illustrate that the differences between the two. That's not an exact design. I'll share my screen here too, just in case there's an opportunity to show you a couple things. But in summary, I think there's a few things of concern that maybe the council wants to weigh and provide some feedback to staff in terms of what might be the ultimate end configuration for on-street parking there. It is currently parked between Helen and First Street as parallel parking. There have been some past discussions and conversations regarding changing that configuration from parallel parking to diagonal parking. And we're talking, the graphic on the screen right now, those areas outlined in red, those are the two areas that were improved in 2020. So we're actually looking at this in between the two red areas, which is not highlighted on this particular graphic, but that's what we're looking at for this particular project to be constructed or start construction in 2022. I did, again, just using these preliminary schematics, tried to tabulate, what's the difference in terms of number of parking spots. You certainly get more parking stalls per linear foot of road with a diagonal parking configuration. However, things like driveways and pedestrian crosswalks and things that might interrupt that more dense parking configuration also impacts that parking count significantly differently. If you think about the core downtown area, so from Helen to Charles, for example, that's diagonally parked right now, there's not a lot of driveways in that section. And the section that we're looking at right now in terms of First to Helen, in the downtown revitalization plan that was, I think, adopted in 2017, 2018, which was kind of, again, a schematic corridor streetscape vision, I guess. This block that we're talking about right now was identified as a transitionary block, different from the core downtown. Now, that plan is not written in stone, so we can deviate from what it shows now in terms of parallel parking. But the number of stalls that we're looking at would be, I guess, from something in the low 40s for parallel parking to something in the high 50s for diagonal parking, knowing that the 6 breaks on both sides of the street, which are either curb cuts for existing driveways, or there's one mid-block crosswalk at First Street too, that does interrupt the flow of those diagonal parking stalls. And since they're at an angle, you have to have a curb transition out. So for every driveway, you might be losing 4, 5, 6 parking stalls if they're angled, for example, as opposed to maybe one driveway is one parallel parking spot, right? So that's why I think if you look at the numbers, 44 to 55 is that was my preliminary count on the screen, and that could go up or down, but low 40s to mid 50s in terms of parallel parking stalls to angled parking stalls. It might not be intuitive to think that they're that close, but that's what the numbers are showing right now. That said, I guess some other impacts to consider also is the 2011 investment by the city in corridor beautification. There were street trees planted at that time. The street lights were redone along that area. Irrigation was installed in the boulevards along Reflex Medical and also areas to the east and west. And if we were to change these parking stalls to diagonal, we would have to remove all of that. And there would likely only be about 5 feet of green space in between what would be ultimately the sidewalk, which would be kind of up against the buildings, close to like the VFW, for example, and then a gap of about 5 feet, and then those angled stalls would start. So similar to what you see like in front of Roddy's or Newman's or something like that, just a different character in terms of how to park that. There is an increase in project cost by making this switch, so it's not only just about additional pavement, because the road has to be a little bit wider to accommodate these angled parking stalls, but we would also have to spend a little bit more money on stormwater management just because there's additional impervious surface. And with the removal and potentially replacing or reconfiguring streetlights and maybe some street trees or things, whatever could be fit in that leftover boulevard, I am estimating that, I think I put it in the packet, as about $350,000, maybe $400,000 of additional, as opposed to just reconstructing it in its existing configuration right now. So that's less than 10% increase to overall project cost, about 8%, 7-8%. But still, that is certainly something to consider, that if it's reconstructed in its original configuration, on-street parking, I guess you could look at it as a cost savings to the project. Now, there have been legitimate conversations revolving around redevelopment downtown and the need for more public parking downtown. And I think that's why this has been looked at and discussed in the past, that maybe we can extend that angled parking west. But again, Public Works and myself did want to have the conversation with council real quickly to get a sense in terms of, is this something that we should really drive at, or is this something that the impacts maybe outweigh the benefits in terms of increasing the number of public on-street parking stalls in a block where maybe because of the number of driveways is slightly greater, that the original designers of 7th Avenue decided that that was a reasonable place to stop the angled parking and change it, to what it is today in terms of parallel parking. Let's see, on the screen I can show, so this is the figure that's in the packet. This is a general illustration of kind of reconstructing things in its existing configuration here. We have bus stops on either side of the block going each direction. Certainly the angled parking within that, the remaining section between Helen and Margaret to continue what was done in 2020 would be improved as angled parking as it is today, but then again, parallel parking between First and Helen. And then, again, this is schematic. It doesn't show each driveway break, but it does show that the number of angled stalls could be done everywhere from in front of Reflex Medical on the west side of this figure all the way up to the intersection of Helen. And then really briefly, I did want to just take you down the corridor here. So this is actually recent street view photography that I assume was done by Google very recently, because it shows the striping and paving that was just recently completed on the 2020 project to the west. So this is traveling northeast, going downtown, towards downtown on 7th Avenue. You can see new sidewalk, these new gateway medians that were installed again as a part of that kind of corridor re-envisioning of the 7th Avenue. And this is where we would about start this new 2022 project. You can see the pavement change. And you can see on either side of the street some of the street trees, street lighting. Certainly, these are wider than average grass boulevards that also include that irrigation that I mentioned. Again, newer street lighting, approximately 2011, maybe 2012. There's also some landscaping here that would also need to be removed in terms of aesthetics, I guess, for the corridor if we were to change what you're looking at here on both sides. If you can imagine half or more than half of this grassy boulevard on either side going away, and then cars being parked in an angular configuration along the roadway. That's the transition that I'm talking about that would be potentially contemplated if we were to make that change. This project would be the time to make that change. There's going to be no other better opportunity, I guess, to change to angled parking in the foreseeable future. And as you can see right here, this is kind of how much real estate, if you will, that angled parking configuration takes up within the roadway. So that's I know we're short on time, my very brief presentation. I'll stand for any questions the council might have.
Councilmember Peterson?
Handicap, are we up to code with the handicap? It just doesn't seem like, it seems like it's limited. I've had a couple concerns from business owners. And you're being conscientious of that?
We are. So the standard for on-street parking is generally the same as it would be for off-street parking, so it's 1 stall per 25.
Okay.
I can't speak for all of the older areas, but as we've redone, these stalls
The new
have
stuff?
been designated. I've reached out to a resident, so I'm maybe hearing some of the same things that you are, so we're doing some double checks, and there is some potential signing and striping that either is yet to come or is still a part of the close out of the project on Margaret. So that's
What I've been telling
underway
them.
right now.
I said
Right.
kind of wait and see.
Right. So I think, and as we move forward in these future projects, we can't provide a handicap access at every single business, certainly, but usually when you're doing on-street projects, you try to pick either, both sides of the street and maybe at the ends of the block, so at least, and maybe if you can, the middle of the block, so again, within that general 1 per 25 stall count, there's at least a way or a place for people to utilize it within that block without having to cross the street or something like, or have to travel too far. So it may not be the configuration that is most convenient for everyone or every location or store, shop, storefront or restaurant or bar, but the accommodation should be there, and we are doing some more double checks on the newer pieces.
Do you need an answer tonight from us?
I'd love your feedback, and if you're leaning one way or the other, I mean, I've laid out all the facts here, and we can certainly discuss it in more detail, but I do need to get the design team moving. We do want to bid this project as early as possible in 2022, and holding on this for even 2 weeks certainly does impact that schedule. So I'd like to get a general sense if you think we need to really pour into this and provide more detail, because it's a totally different design to change the parking as it is to reconstruct the parking in its existing configuration.
To me, it seems like more aesthetic-wise, when you come down the hill to come in, you transition into what it is right today. You got a lot more green space, and as you move in downtown, when there's more retail, more in the core center of the downtown, the parallel makes, or the diagonal makes more sense, where you got Reflex, you got the VFW, the other buildings, they have their parking lots. They do have parking lots, so they offer parking, more parking down in that area. You're only going to lose possibly 10 spots by going from diagonal to parallel, or parallel to diagonal. Is that right, Morgan? About
Something in that range.
Would be
yeah.
about 10
It's
spots.
less of a difference than I thought it was going to be when I started counting.
right.
So
So to me, for me, it's having that green space coming into downtown, that extra green space kind of looks more aesthetic-wise for me, better. Councilmember Wong?
Yeah, well, first, I think it may be salient for the Design and Review Committee. Now, the Planning Commission has taken on some of the responsibilities of that to review that and provide feedback if they haven't already. And then second, I think that parallel parking makes more sense from a safety perspective. So I would lean that way, and I think parallel is just that.
Councilmember Peterson?
Nobody parallel parks anymore. The cars do it. I mean, it's trickier,
Good
but
point.
I
There's not a
know what
lot
you're
of cars
saying.
parked in that section as well. We did
Councilwoman
talk about that.
Wong. I think I like the mayor's take on it. I like that coming down, and the green space is really important to me, and the diagonal parking, I'm all for, and I'm hopefully that our parking lots are gonna be upgraded, so.
Councilmember Cole?
So we've had an aesthetic opinion, we've had a safety opinion, I'll give my financial. It's about $36,000 a parking spot. To me, it's not worth the spend to make the change, keep it parallel. I was shocked and amazed that we only gained
Right.
less than a dozen.
Right. And I think that has to do with the curb cuts, right? And the core of downtown does not have that many, and I think that's, the founding fathers were thinking of that when they diagonally parked that section, that it made more sense.
Is it feasible to go to planning commission?
Yeah, I'll check the dates, certainly nothing wrong. I've got enough feedback now to at least keep the designers moving on a path. I can still check with planning commission or DRC. I'll have to check on how that works, but certainly no problem getting their feedback as well, too.
Okay, good,
Thank you.
thank you. Anything else for city manager or finance director? The dual role. If not, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Peterson. Oh, Wong. Councilmember Wong, I thought I. Second? Second by Councilmember Peterson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll take a 2-minute break real quick.